Hello, my friends. D.L. Anderson here. Welcome back to Transformation by Truth podcast as we share the truth concerning these last days and what you must do to save yourself from the violent times that are just ahead. Today's podcast is a word of truth accounting of the end times. The end is coming. The end is near. Today's podcast is entitled End Times 367, How Disobedience Plagues the Mind, Part 4, The Impact of Nonconformance. The podcast objectives are analyze the great peril of self-doubt, analyze the impact of nonconformance, and analyze the primary indicators of the spirit of nonconformance. This lesson contains timelines and other visuals. Therefore, if you are listening to the podcast, I advise you to watch the video version on our website or YouTube, or request a PDF of the lesson so you can add the visual effect. You are good enough. Shalom, my beloved brothers and sisters, and welcome to Day 129 of our exposition of lawlessness. In the most recent podcast, we analyzed the impact of noncompliance and how this spiritual virus progresses the work of despair by compromising our planning zone. And yet, we understand that the damage of disobedience is not finished. The damage of disobedience is not done. And thus, we must progress this analysis by revealing the impact of nonconformance. And we will continue using the story of King Saul recorded in 1 Samuel 15, 1 through 26. I will start by using noncompliance as a launching pad to introduce the impact of nonconformance. Along these lines, it is clear that Saul's noncompliance was an evolution of doubt, but not just any doubt. Alas, Saul was victimized by perhaps the most damaging form of doubt. Enter self-doubt. If you're not convinced, I ask you to consider the following inflection point. From there, I ask you to reason within yourselves if there is truly any form of doubt more dangerous than this. Those who fall victim to self-doubt are not only victimized by a direct lack of faith in themselves, they are also victimized by an indirect lack of faith in Elohim. For when you doubt the vision Elohim has for you because of your lack of self-confidence, you are indirectly doubting Elohim. This is why I consider self-doubt to be the worst form of doubt, for it is not limited to your lack of confidence in yourself and your abilities. Quite the contrary, self-doubt will evolve into a lack of faith in the Most High and his vision for your life. This is why self-doubt is so perilous, for although you are not directly questioning Elohim, you will inherit the same punishment as those who do. Here is what you need to know if you or someone you know is in this depressed state. Yahuwah would never call you to do something you could never do. Likewise, he would never call you to be someone you could never be. Therefore, you cannot make his will for your life about you and your shortcomings. Trust me, he is well aware of your strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities. He is even more aware of them than you. Psalm 139, 1 through 4 is revealing. O Yahuwah, you have searched me and know me. You know my sitting down and my rising up. You understand my thoughts afar off. You sift my path and my lying down, and know well all my ways. For there is not a word on my tongue, but see, O Yahuwah, you know it all. Heretofore, seeing as Elohim knows us better than we know ourselves, why would we believe that he would create plans for us that we could not succeed? Why would we believe that he would ever set us up to fail? The answer is sure. It's because the spiritual virus of despair is causing us to believe that we are not good enough. Listen to me. If you feel that way, allow me to be very clear. Despair is a crook and a liar because you are good enough. If Elohim has called you, then he is for you. And if he is for you, then no one can stand against you. Your destiny, my friend, is yours for the taking. Now rise up and take it, for no one can fulfill your destiny but you. For no one is good enough but you. The impact of nonconformance. Now, unfortunately for King Saul, he was too insecure to see this. And because he would not fulfill his destiny, he lost it, and the kingdom fell to David. Not only this, but Saul died prematurely on the field of battle, as did his sons. The reason why is sure, vis-a-vis the spirit of noncompliance within Saul evolved into a spirit of nonconformance. Perhaps the easiest way to understand the damage of nonconformance is by comparing despair to distrust. For distrust is the application of nonconformance. Along these lines, we understand that despair only compromises a fraction of your thought dimension. And thus, your battles with despair should be relatively straightforward if you are serious about your spiritual trade and indeed a true contender for the seal of Elohim. But alas, this is not the case for the spiritual scourge of distrust. For as you have learned, distrust deals a death blow to your thought dimension. Look here, whereas despair compromises a fraction of your thought dimension, distrust compromises more than half. Here lies the inflection and the problem. And it is such an immense problem that I will offer it to you formally as an inflection point. This is one I would advise you to bookmark. As the prime objective of the thought dimension is to generate an informed thought that can be acted on, i.e., executed, the evolution of nonconformance is designed to take over your execution zone. You can see this by observing the diagram below. Your planning zone at the bottom left is compromised by noncompliance, as you have learned. On the other hand, your execution zone at the bottom right is now compromised by nonconformance. And both of these critical zones are connected to your thought generation processes, which are being controlled by despair and distrust. Here lies a grave danger and a perilous point of no return. To wit, by controlling your execution zone, nonconformance controls the thoughts that will pass from your mind to all the other divisions of your soul. The intent that these thoughts should be transacted. Now, the great peril in this scenario is sure, and I have stated it before. Vis-a-vis, if you think about anything long enough, you are eventually going to do it. Ergo, as the thoughts in your execution zone are contaminated by nonconformance, you are giving yourself the option not to conform to the will of Elohim. Alas, his vision for you is real, and he has revealed it to you. Nevertheless, nonconformance has the power to create a new vision, which reflects yourself and all the degrees of lawlessness which are feeding it. This new vision then becomes the basis for nonconformance and noncompliance. For all your planning efforts will be directed toward executing this new vision. The telltales of nonconformance. Now, this is where we find King Saul in 1 Samuel 15. To wit, because he has succumbed to the spirit of noncompliance, he effectively opened the door to the spirit of nonconformance, which led him to disobey the command of Elohim. Like many false believers in our midst, he fell into a state of denial when confronted with the truth that he had not obeyed the command. And this is to be expected, for denial is another degree of lawlessness we will encounter in our quest. Along these lines, Saul's denial was not outright absurd and non-relevant. Quite the contrary, Saul fell victim to the spirit of dishonesty, i.e., another degree of lawlessness we will address in the near future. Here is what you need to know now about dishonesty. The spirit of dishonesty is designed to seduce uncommitted believers into doing a fraction of the Father's will, and then deceiving themselves into believing they will be accepted by Elohim, even though they have disregarded some fraction of his will. Now, the spirit of dishonesty was clearly operational within Saul, for he declared, I did obey the voice of Yahuwah, and I went on the way on which Yahuwah sent me, and brought back Agag, sovereign of Amalek, and I put Amalek under the ban. But the people took of the spoil of the sheep and cattle, the best of that which should have been put under the ban, to slaughter to Yahuwah your Elohim in Gilgal. Clearly, there are several telltales in Saul's declaration to Samuel. First and foremost, he is not only in denial concerning his disobedience, but he is also lying, i.e., a byproduct of dishonesty. To wit, the command was not to bring back Agag alive, and yet he is admitting that he did bring back Agag alive. Ergo, by admitting that he did not do as he was told, he is blatantly lying in declaring that he did, in fact, obey. The next telltale is classic. To wit, he blames the people for his decision not to obey the voice of Elohim. Listen to me. Blaming others for your transgressions is another byproduct of dishonesty, which is why Saul's story has no legs. Brothers and sisters, Saul was the king, and thus he was the only one who had the authority to save any of the livestock. Clearly, the people did not have this authority, and thus they could not be held accountable for any scenario where any of the livestock survived. Quite the contrary, Accountability is tied to authority. Ergo, even if the people were responsible for influencing Saul to allow them to have their way, Saul was still accountable to Elohim. It was on him and him alone to see that the will of Elohim was done. Look, here lies the next telltale. That is, the shifting of accountability. A shift Saul was apropos to sign off on due to justification, i.e., the next telltale. On this wise, Saul justified his disobedience because he assumed it would be a good thing to keep back the best of the livestock to sacrifice to Elohim. Now, there are two things wrong with this assumption. First of all, it's very hard to believe that sacrifice was their primary motive. Why? It's because Saul, ironically and yet honestly, admits that the people spared the best of the livestock. If you study the Hebrew root word for spared, it reveals two key associations: pity and procurement. Thus, we conclude the people had pity on the best of the livestock because they wanted to keep them, which is the real reason why they spared them. It is because they were procuring the best livestock for themselves. My dear friends, we know this to be true. For why would they have pity on these animals if they were honestly planning on sacrificing them to Elohim, as opposed to procuring the best for themselves? Listen to me. Sacrifice is a service, and service is not based upon procurement or pity. Service is based upon obedient faith to the will of Elohim. No doubt, these rebels somehow missed this, and thus we conclude either the people were lying to Saul about their intentions, which is highly likely, or Saul was lying to Samuel because he was in on it with the people, which is even more likely. Either way, this honest episode of dishonesty did not work with Samuel. Look here, with the discerning spirit, he took to case that these liars had a leg to stand on, and he rebuked them, saying, "Does Yahuwah delight in ascending offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of Yahuwah? Look, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams." In other words, Samuel counseled Saul, saying, "Your reason for keeping back the best livestock is worthless. It has no meaning nor value, for you did not obey the command. You should have obeyed the command." Then he goes on to really hit Saul hard with the truth, saying, "For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as wickedness and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of Yahuwah, he also does reject you as sovereign." Now, it is at this junction that Saul finally admits that he did not obey the voice of Elohim. He confesses that he had sinned because he feared the people. And he pleaded with Samuel to pardon his sin and return with him so he could repent and be restored to Elohim. But alas, it was too late, for Samuel is revealing Yahuwah has torn the reign of Israel from you today and has given it to a neighbor of yours better than you. This is the impact of nonconformance. And yet, the damage of disobedience is not finished. The damage of disobedience is not done. Now, here is the final word. Behold, a wall of death will form, around all of whom will not conform. Despite this fact, the extended nation of Israel is being plagued by nonconformance the same way it is being ravaged by noncompliance. And if you really paid attention to the points that were made in this podcast, you should clearly see why. It's because judgment for an evil work is not executed quickly, and thus many are not convinced they are going to die. And yet, death is coming. The wicked shall be punished in a lake of brimstone and fire. For all who are corrupted by the spirit of nonconformance are not only disobedient, the truth is they are all liars. Now, here is today's assignment. Meditate on the word you have heard today. And as always, ask the Father to reveal the truth to you. For the children of Elohim live by conviction. And if he has not convicted you, or if you had not heard him concerning these matters, you should pray until you do. Today, I want you to meditate on the word of truth we shared and ask the Father to give you clarity on these matters by his Spirit. Seeing as there is a wealth of material, this is the only assignment for today. Now, here is what's next. We completed today's podcast, End Times 367, How Disobedience Plagues the Mind, Part 4. And the next podcast is entitled End Times 368, How Disobedience Plagues the Mind, Part 5. I will post this podcast on Friday, November 8th, 2024. Until then, my friends, continue to be led by the Spirit of Elohim. Continue to watch. Continue to pray. Continue in fasting. And most of all, continue to be focused. For the end is coming. The end is near.